Imagine you're standing in a factory. The year is 2002. The lights are dimming. The machines are slowing down. And the last car, the very last one, is rolling off the assembly line in Crewe, England. The workers who built it aren't cheering. They're quiet, because they know they will never build this car again. That car was the Rolls-Royce Silver Seraph. And this is its story. To understand why the Silver Seraph matters, why it matters deeply, not just to car collectors but to the entire story of American luxury culture, you have to go back. Way back. Not just to the 1990s, but to the very idea of what a Rolls-Royce meant to the world. See, if you grew up in America in the 20th century, a Rolls-Royce wasn't just a car. It was a statement. It was a symbol. It said something about you that no words ever could. Hollywood royalty drove them. Jazz legends parked them outside the finest clubs in New York City. Oil tycoons from Texas had them shipped over specially. Presidents and prime ministers rode in them. Even Elvis, the king himself, couldn't resist the allure of that iconic grille, that spirit of ecstasy hood ornament floating above the road like a dream made real. For over 100 years, the name Rolls-Royce didn't just represent the best car in the world. It represented the very concept that best existed. That someone somewhere was still building things with absolute devotion to perfection, not because they had to, but because they refused to do it any other way. But by the late 1980s, something was changing. The world was moving fast. Technology was exploding. German engineers at BMW and Mercedes-Benz were rewriting the rulebook on what a luxury car could be. Japanese brands were entering the conversation. And Rolls-Royce, this grand, proud, old institution, was starting to feel the weight of its own history pressing down on it. The car they were selling in the late 1980s, the Silver Spirit, was beautiful, classic, dignified, but it was also aging. Under the hood, under the chassis, under that hand-stitched leather interior, the technology was decades old. The world was moving into a new era, and Rolls-Royce needed to decide, would they move with it or be left behind? That decision would lead to one of the most dramatic, emotional, and bittersweet stories in all of automotive history. The story of the Silver Seraph begins not with a blueprint or a board meeting. It begins with a question. A simple, terrifying question that someone inside the walls of the Rolls-Royce factory in Crewe, England must have asked themselves sometime in the late 1980s. What does the world's greatest car look like for the 21st century? Development officially kicked off in the late 1980s. But it was in October of 1990 that the design team truly began putting pencil to paper, or rather, pen to drafting board, because this was still an era when cars were born by hand, sketched by human beings who understood that beauty wasn't something you calculated. It was something you felt. By April of 1991, the conceptual design was frozen. The shape had been found. The lines had been agreed upon. And then in June of that same year, management looked at what the designers had created, and they approved it. Now, stop and think about what that moment must have felt like. You've been tasked with designing the next great Rolls-Royce. Not just any car, but a Rolls-Royce. A car that has to carry the weight of a century of history while simultaneously pointing toward the future. And you've done it. And the people in charge are looking at your work, and they're nodding their heads, and they're saying yes. That's it. That's the one. But they weren't done yet. Not even close. Over the next several years, the design was refined, polished, and refined again. Every curve, every angle, every proportion. By 1994, the definitive design had been reached, a car that was unmistakably a Rolls-Royce, with all the nobility and restraint that name demanded, but that also felt genuinely new, genuinely modern. Like a classic painting restored to its original brilliance. Then came the engineering. And this is where the story gets truly interesting. Because here's the thing about Rolls-Royce in the 1990s. They were no longer a standalone company in the traditional sense. Through a complex series of business dealings that only the British could have engineered with such elegant confusion, Rolls-Royce, the car company, had ended up in the hands of Vickers, a British engineering and defense company. And Vickers, wise enough to know they needed help building a modern luxury car, turned to BMW for their powertrain. So, under the elegant hood of the most British car ever built, there would be a German heart. Let's talk about what made the Silver Seraph tick. Because if you're a car person, and if you're watching this, you almost certainly are, you need to understand just how remarkable this powertrain was. The engine chosen for the Silver Seraph was the BMW M73. Say that again. The BMW M73. A 5.4-liter, all-aluminum alloy V12 engine. 12 cylinders. Silky smooth. Whisper quiet. Effortlessly powerful. Now here's a fact that stops most people cold. The Silver Seraph was the first Rolls-Royce in 60 years to have a 12-cylinder engine. 60 years. You have to go all the way back to 1939, to the legendary Phantom III, to find another 12-cylinder Rolls-Royce. That car was a pre-war masterpiece, an engineering marvel of its era. And now, in 1998, the spirit of that grand configuration was returning, wrapped in modern aluminum and mated to a 5-speed automatic transmission. Think about what a V12 engine means. In the world of internal combustion, 12 cylinders represents the pinnacle of smoothness. You know how a 4-cylinder engine sounds, busy, working hard. You can feel every combustion event. A V8 is smoother, more powerful, a classic American sound. But a V12? A V12 doesn't feel like it's burning fuel at all. It feels like it's running on liquid silk. The power comes on like an ocean wave, slow, inevitable, overwhelming. There's no drama. There's no noise. There's just motion. Effortless, aristocratic motion. Paired with this engine was a 5-speed automatic transmission that managed the power with quiet authority. No harsh shifts. No jerking. Just smooth, seamless progress through the gears, as if the car itself was too dignified to make a fuss about something as common as changing speed. The result? A top speed of 225 kilometers per hour. That's 140 miles per hour for our American friends, and an acceleration that the road tests of the era described not as fast, but as inevitable. Like gravity. You press the accelerator, and the world just rearranges itself around you. And the chassis that supported all of this? It was 65% stiffer than the Silver Spirit it replaced. 65%. That's not an improvement. That's a transformation. It means that when you drove a Silver Seraph over a rough road, the body didn't flex, didn't creak, didn't shudder. It moved as a single, solid unit. The ride was not just comfortable, it was geological. Like sitting inside a mountain that happens to be moving at highway speed. Add to that the standard digital engine management system, adaptive ride control that could read the road and adjust the suspension in real time, and anti-lock brakes, and you have a car that was, by the standards of 1998, genuinely cutting edge. Not just in terms of luxury, but in terms of technology. The Silver Seraph wasn't just a beautiful car. It was a sophisticated machine. But let's be honest with each other. Nobody buys a Rolls-Royce because of the engine specs. They buy it because of what it feels like to sit inside one. And stepping into the cabin of a Silver Seraph was, and still is, an experience unlike anything else on four wheels. The first thing you notice is the silence. Before you even register the leather, the wood, the gauges, you notice the silence. It's not the silence of a well-insulated car. It's a different kind of quiet. A deliberate quiet. The kind of quiet that used to exist in great libraries and old cathedrals. The kind of quiet that says, whatever is happening out there in the world, it cannot touch you in here. Then your eyes adjust and you see it all. The seats and dashboard were upholstered in Connolly leather, and if you know your leather, you know that name. Connolly was the finest automotive leather supplier in the world, used by Rolls-Royce for decades. Each hide was selected by hand. Each piece was cut, stitched, and fitted by craftspeople who had spent years, sometimes decades, learning their trade. The leather wasn't just soft. It was alive in a way that synthetic materials can never replicate. It breathed. It developed character over time. It became yours. The dashboard trim was faced with burl walnut veneer, glossy, deep, almost luminous. Run your fingers across it and you'd feel the grain, the natural patterns of the wood, each one unique because every piece of burl walnut is different from every other piece. No two Silver Seraphs had identical wood. They couldn't. That's what happens when you use real materials instead of plastic that pretends to be real materials. For the driver, the gear selector was column-mounted, a nod to tradition, to the long history of Rolls-Royce design. And the gauges followed a traditional layout that any vintage Rolls-Royce owner would have recognized immediately. There was continuity here, a sense that you were part of something larger than yourself, that the car you were driving was connected, spiritually and aesthetically, to every great Rolls-Royce that had come before it. For rear passengers, there were folding picnic trays faced with the same glossy burl walnut veneer. Imagine that. You're being driven across the English countryside, or across the Nevada desert, or through the canyons of Los Angeles, and you unfold a walnut tray and set your crystal glass upon it, and you watch the world slide past your window in perfect, air-conditioned comfort, and you think, yes, this is how it should be. This is what life, at its most considered and civilized, can feel like. The exterior was available in 1- and 2-tone finishes, because why have one color when you can have two? The Silver Seraph was a canvas for personal expression, and Rolls-Royce's bespoke department could accommodate almost any combination imaginable. This was not just transportation. This was curated living on wheels. Now, here's something that most people don't know about the Silver Seraph, a piece of the story that makes it even more fascinating. It had a twin. When the Silver Seraph debuted at the Geneva Motor Show on March 3, 1998, it wasn't alone. Standing next to it, sharing its platform, sharing its body shell, sharing almost everything except its badge and its grille, was the Bentley Arnage. See, at this point in history, Rolls-Royce and Bentley were sister companies, both owned by Vickers, both built at the same factory and crew, both descended from the same British engineering tradition. The Seraph and the Arnage were, in automotive terms, what you might call platform twins, the same skeleton, the same body structure, the same basic architecture, but dressed very differently, tuned very differently, and aimed at very different kinds of drivers. The Silver Seraph, with its V12 BMW engine and its focus on absolute smoothness and refinement, was for the person who wanted to be transported, who wanted to climb in and be delivered to their destination feeling as if they'd traveled not through space, but through time, arriving somewhere more elegant, more civilized than where they'd started. The Bentley Arnage, on the other hand, that car had a twin-turbocharged V8 engine of its own design. Firmer suspension, a more athletic, more assertive character. If the Seraph was a diplomat, the Arnage was a general. Both wore the finest suits money could buy, but one was negotiating, and one was commanding. This distinction was important. For decades, the relationship between Rolls-Royce and Bentley had been somewhat blurry. Many of the cars were nearly identical, differentiated mainly by badges. But the Seraph Arnage pairing represented a genuine attempt to give each brand its own personality, its own character, its own reason for existing. The RAC, one of Britain's most respected automotive authorities, gave the Silver Seraph a rating of 7.6 out of 10. High praise for a new model. And their words captured something essential about what Rolls-Royce was trying to do, that the Silver Seraph marked a new start in their quest to once more be recognized as manufacturers of the world's best cars, and that it was, in their estimation, quite a credible effort. Quite a credible effort. Only the British could make extraordinary sound understated. In the year 2000, 2 years after the Silver Seraph had established itself as the pinnacle of British luxury motoring, Rolls-Royce returned to the Geneva Motor Show with something new. Something special. Something that took an already extraordinary car and made it even more so. They called it the Park Ward. The Park Ward name carried its own history. Park Ward was a legendary coach-building company that had been creating bespoke bodies for Rolls-Royce chassis since the 1920s, crafting one-off creations for kings, maharajas, film stars, and industrialists who wanted something that no money could simply buy off a showroom floor. Something unique. Something made exactly for them. Reviving that name for this model was a deliberate act of reverence. A reminder that Rolls-Royce's history wasn't just about building cars, it was about building dreams. The Park Ward was an extended wheelbase version of the Silver Seraph, meaning it was longer. Specifically, 250 millimeters, just under 10 inches, had been added, mostly in the rear doors, to create more legroom for passengers in the back. 10 inches. That doesn't sound like much until you're sitting in it. Then you understand immediately. There's a difference between first class and private aviation, and that difference is roughly 10 inches of legroom. This was a car for people who were always passengers, who were always the ones being driven. The rear seat of the Park Ward wasn't just comfortable, it was an environment. It was a room. It was the most expensive, most refined, most considered personal space that four wheels could provide. Rolls-Royce initially planned to build 200 of these cars, but the Park Ward never reached that number. Production was discontinued after 2002, the same year the Silver Seraph itself ended production, and only 127 Park Wards were ever made. 127 cars. In the entire world.
Think about that.
You could fit every Park Ward ever built into a single parking lot, and there would still be spaces left over. This is not just a rare car. This is a genuinely scarce piece of history. And the Park Ward carries another distinction that gives it an almost melancholy beauty. It was the last car ever to bear the Park Ward name. That legendary coach-building legacy, those decades of bespoke creation, of cars built for royalty and legends, ended with this car. With those 127 examples. With those 10 extra inches of rear legroom. Now we come to the part of the story that nobody wanted to write. The part that was, in many ways, inevitable, but that still, when it arrived, felt like a loss. Behind the scenes of Silver Seraph production, something dramatic was unfolding in the boardrooms and law firms of Europe. Rolls-Royce, the whole company, the whole legacy, the entire brand, was up for sale. Vickers, who owned Rolls-Royce and Bentley, had decided to divest. And the bidding war that followed was like watching two titans fight over a crown jewel. On one side, Volkswagen. On the other, BMW. Both wanted the prestige. Both wanted the history. Both understood that the name Rolls-Royce was worth more than any factory, any tooling, any patent portfolio. The deal, when it finally resolved, was one of the most unusual in automotive history. Volkswagen bought the physical assets, the factories, the tooling, the designs, the existing inventory. They got Bentley. They got crew. They got the cars sitting on the production line. But BMW got the name. The actual trademark for Rolls-Royce, the spirit of ecstasy, the double R badge, the name itself, belonged to BMW. Because decades earlier, when BMW had supplied engines to Rolls-Royce, they had secured rights to the brand name as part of the arrangement. It was like winning a poker game only to discover the pot contained an empty safe, and your opponent had quietly pocketed the key years ago. The result was that Silver Seraph production ended in late 2002. The Volkswagen marketing license for the Rolls-Royce mark was handed over to BMW, who immediately set about building their own version of Rolls-Royce from scratch. A new factory in Goodwood, England. A new car, the Phantom 7. A new era. And in crew, the workers who had built Silver Seraph said goodbye to the car. They would continue building Bentleys. The Arnage lived on, even received a return of the beloved old 6.75-liter V8 Rolls-Royce engine, much updated and improved. But the Silver Seraph was gone. A total of 1,570 Silver Seraphs were built during those 4 years of production. That's not a large number by any automotive standard. But Rolls-Royces were never supposed to be numerous. They were supposed to be special. And the last 170 cars? They were given something extra. A farewell gift from the factory. Special wing badges. A commemorative plaque inside. Chromed mirror caps. Spirit of Ecstasy hubcaps. And red Rolls-Royce badging that set them apart, visually, unmistakably, as the final chapter of something that would never come again. Let's talk money for a moment. Because a car like this demands it. When the Silver Seraph was new, when you could walk into a Rolls-Royce dealership in 1998 and order one, the base price in the United Kingdom was £155,175. In the United States, that translated to $220,695. $220,000. In 1998 money. To put that in perspective, you could have bought a very nice house in most American cities for that price. You could have bought 4 or 5 of the most expensive American muscle cars of the era. You could have bought nearly a dozen of BMW's most expensive 7 Series sedans. For that money, Rolls-Royce was offering you something that no amount of additional options on any other car could provide, a sense of arrival. The feeling that you had, in some fundamental way, succeeded. Not just financially. Anyone with enough money can buy expensive things. But aesthetically,
culturally,
the Silver Seraph was the kind of car that told the world not just that you had wealth, but that you had taste. In the hierarchy of Rolls-Royce's lineup at the time, the Silver Seraph was second in price only to the Rolls-Royce Corniche, the ultra-exclusive convertible that was as close to a hand-built one-off as a production car could get. But after the Silver Spur was discontinued, the Seraph became the most accessible Rolls-Royce in the lineup. The entry point to the dream, if you will. The most accessible Rolls-Royce. At $220,000. In 1998. Today, on the classic car market, a well-preserved Silver Seraph tells a different financial story, one that rewards the patient, the knowledgeable, and the genuinely passionate. These cars represent extraordinary value for what they offer. Compared to what a similar-era Bentley Arnage commands, or what a Rolls-Royce from the 1980s sells for, the Silver Seraph has historically been undervalued by the market. Which means for a classic car buyer who understands what they're looking at, it represents an opportunity. There's something particular about the relationship between Americans and Rolls-Royce that deserves its own moment in this story. America has always had a complicated love affair with British luxury. There's something about the British approach to fine things, the understatement, the craftsmanship, the sense of history, that resonates deeply with certain American sensibilities. Not the flashy, conspicuous wealth of a young country still figuring out what success looks like, but the quieter, more settled confidence of people who have already answered that question. Rolls-Royce understood this. They always understood it. And the Silver Seraph was built with the American market firmly in mind. The American specification cars were carefully tuned for the roads, regulations, and tastes of their buyers. The emission standards were met. The Silver Seraph conforms to Euro 3 standards, which translated well to American requirements of the era. The suspension tuning, already on the softer, more comfortable end of the spectrum, suited the long highway miles that define American driving. And American buyers responded. The Silver Seraph found its way into the garages of entertainers and executives, of entrepreneurs and old money families, of people across the country who understood that a car could be more than a way to get from one place to another. It could be a statement of values, a declaration of what you believed quality looked like. In Beverly Hills and Manhattan, in Palm Beach and Houston, Silver Seraphs appeared at the finest hotels, the most exclusive restaurants, the grandest private events. Not as show-offs, a Rolls-Royce driver, almost by definition, is not showing off. They've moved beyond that. They're making a quieter, more confident declaration. And today, those same cars sit in climate-controlled garages across America, cared for by enthusiasts who understand exactly what they have. They drive them on weekends. They take them to concours events. They talk about them with a reverence usually reserved for fine wine or great art. Because that's what the Silver Seraph is, ultimately. It's not just a car. It's a piece of art that happens to have an engine. So, why are we here? Why, in 2024, is the Silver Seraph still worth talking about? Still worth caring about? Still worth spending 20 minutes of your time learning about? Because it represents something that's increasingly rare in the automotive world, and increasingly rare in the world generally. The Silver Seraph was built by people who cared. Not people who were optimizing for profit margins or building to a price point or making decisions based on what focus groups said. People who genuinely, deeply, almost obsessively cared about what they were making. People who understood that the difference between good and great isn't a percentage point, it's a philosophy. It's a commitment to doing things a certain way even when doing them a different way would be easier and cheaper and faster. Nearly a decade of development. From October 1990 to late 1997, 7 years of refinement, testing, redesigning, reconsidering. 7 years for a car that would be in production for just 4 years. That ratio, more time developing than producing, tells you everything you need to know about the values that went into this car. The leather was cut by hand. The wood was selected by eye. The engine was tuned not for raw numbers on a specification sheet, but for the sensation of driving, for the way it made you feel at 50 miles per hour on a quiet country road on a Sunday morning. And at the end of production, when they knew the line was shutting down, the people at Crew made those last 170 cars special. They gave them extra badges, extra chrome, commemorative plaques. Not because anyone required it, not because the accountants approved it, but because it was the right thing to do. Because a car this significant deserved a proper goodbye. That is what craftsmanship looks like. That is what tradition looks like. And that is why, more than 20 years after the last Silver Seraph rolled off the line in Crewe, people still seek them out, still restore them, still drive them with pride, still tell their stories. The factory in Crewe, England still stands. After the great corporate rearrangement of the early 2000s, it became a Bentley factory, still building some of the finest cars in the world, still carrying forward many of the traditions that made the Silver Seraph what it was. BMW opened their new Rolls-Royce factory in Goodwood in 2003 and began producing the Phantom 7, a brilliant car in its own right, a worthy successor in many ways to the legacy of British luxury motoring. The Rolls-Royce brand survived. It thrived. It became something new and extraordinary. But the Silver Seraph, that specific, particular, unrepeatable thing, was done. It was a product of its exact moment, of the transition between the 20th and 21st centuries, of the old ways of building cars and the new technologies that were just beginning to emerge, of a corporate structure that was about to be completely dismantled and rebuilt from scratch. It could only have been made when and how it was made. All 1,570 of them, plus those 127 park wards. In total, fewer than 1,700 Silver Seraphs were ever built. To put that in perspective, a popular American pickup truck sells more than that in a single day, which means that if you ever see a Silver Seraph parked at a car show, sitting in a dealer's lot, gliding silently past you on a boulevard, you're seeing something genuinely rare, something that will never be replicated. A moment in automotive history, preserved in steel and leather and walnut and glass, still moving through the world. Give it the attention it deserves. Because that car, that quiet, dignified, impossibly elegant machine, carries with it the final chapter of a very long and very beautiful story. The story of how one factory, in one small English city, for one brief shining moment at the turn of the millennium, built what they believed was the world's greatest car. And they weren't wrong. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, thank you. You're exactly the kind of person this video was made for, someone who understands that cars aren't just machines. They're the stories of the people who built them and the people who drove them, preserved in metal and light, rolling through history 1 mile at a time. If you want more stories like this, more deep dives into the greatest, most fascinating cars ever made, make sure you're subscribed. And drop a comment below. Do you think the Silver Seraph is one of the most underrated luxury cars in history? Or is there another car that deserves that title? Until next time, keep driving, keep dreaming, and never settle for ordinary.